The battlefield was silent except for the distant rumble of explosions. She lay injured, every movement painful, every breath a battle. Yet in the midst of chaos, her eyes locked on the enemy positions, and with a calm, resolute voice, she commanded an airstrike that would change the course of the mission. How did someone so wounded hold such control over life and death in that moment? The early morning air was thick with tension, the kind that presses down on your chest before the first gunshot. Dust swirled across the barren landscape, kicked up by the relentless wind and the faint hum of distant vehicles. She adjusted her gear, checking the comms one last time. Every soldier knew what was at stake. This mission was critical, and failure was not an option. From the first step onto the rocky terrain, it was clear this would not be a routine operation. Intelligence reports had warned of a fortified enemy position nearby, heavily armed and ready. Every movement had to be calculated, every signal precise. As the squad advanced, the landscape seemed to close in, hills and crags forming shadows that could hide threats at every turn. She moved with a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from years of training. Her eyes scanned constantly, noting every ridge, every crack in the terrain. Her team relied on her as much as their own instincts relied on hers. And yet, even with all the preparation, there was an unshakable awareness that anything could happen in an instant. The first shots rang out before she could fully brace herself. The sharp cracks echoed across the hills, sending the squad diving for cover. The enemy had been waiting, and the ambush was precise. She felt the heat of bullets whizzing past, saw the dirt erupt around her as rounds struck the ground. Instinct took over. She pushed forward, returning fire when possible, all the while assessing the positions and movements of her team. Then, in a split second, it happened. A sharp pain ripped through her leg, and the world seemed to tilt. She fell to the ground, her breath catching in her throat. Dust and smoke filled her vision, mingling with the searing ache that threatened to immobilize her. But even as the pain hit, her mind remained clear. This was no time to freeze. Lives depended on her, not just her own survival. Through the haze of adrenaline and fear, she kept her focus. She directed a nearby teammate to cover a flank, signaling movements with precise gestures. Her team began to react, moving in the coordination drilled into them countless times before. Every second was a battle between instinct and strategy, chaos and control. In that moment, the reality of war pressed down. No one knew if they would walk out of this alive. But she refused to succumb to despair. Even wounded, she was calculating, scanning the horizon for the critical opportunity that could turn the tide of the engagement. She had trained for this. She would not fail, not now. The pain was unlike anything she had ever felt. Every movement sent a jolt through her body, sharp and unrelenting, as if her own muscles were conspiring against her. Her leg throbbed violently, blood soaking through her gear, but she forced herself to stay still, listening. The battlefield around her had grown into a symphony of chaos, shouts, gunfire, the distant roar of vehicles. But for her, a heavy, suffocating silence had settled internally. Her mind raced, each thought carefully chosen despite the fog of pain. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. Every breath was deliberate, every heartbeat a reminder of the fragility of life in these moments. She had trained for hours on strategy and reaction, but nothing truly prepared a soldier for the isolation of being injured on the field, cut off even by inches from immediate danger. She glanced around, noting her squad's positions. They were still fighting, moving with discipline, but the enemy's fire was relentless. A teammate shouted directions, but she could barely make out the words. The world narrowed to the confines of her own body and the immediate threats around her. The pain was raw, but so was her determination. To survive, she had to push beyond the instinct to collapse. Slowly, agonizingly, she adjusted her position, trying to reduce the pressure on her leg. The wind carried the acrid scent of smoke and gunpowder, mixing with the metallic tang of blood. Every nerve in her body screamed for her to surrender, to let someone else take control. But surrendering wasn't an option. Her training, her sense of duty, her very identity refused it. She breathed through the pain, feeling every heartbeat as if it were a drum counting down to an uncertain fate. Time stretched, each second a test of endurance. Her squad called out coordinates, movement orders, and status updates. She wanted to respond, to contribute, but even speaking felt like a monumental task. The world had contracted to the space immediately around her. The jagged rocks under her palms, the heat from the sun, the distant cries of allies and enemies alike. Every sense was heightened, every instinct sharpened. Amid the chaos, she found clarity. Injured, she realized, didn't mean incapacitated. She could still command. She could still influence the battlefield. She could still make a difference. The thought was like a spark in the darkness, a reminder that courage was not the absence of fear or pain, but the ability to act despite them. Drawing on every ounce of strength, she began to form a plan. The enemy positions were vulnerable, and the only way to tip the scales was to coordinate support. But that meant communicating, directing, commanding, all while confined to the ground, every movement an excruciating struggle. Her body screamed at her to stop, to lie still, but her mind refused to listen. She was not just surviving, she was preparing to act. The world around her was chaos incarnate. Smoke and dust swirling, gunfire cracking like relentless thunder, and the shouts of her team blending into a deafening roar. Yet within this storm, her mind became a razor-sharp instrument. Every detail mattered. The enemy's positions, her team's locations, the terrain's subtle shifts. Despite the agony in her leg, despite the blood and the pounding in her head, she had a single mission. Call in the airstrike that could save them all. Her hand shook as she reached for the radio. A tremor of pain shot through her, but she gritted her teeth and forced her voice to calm clarity. This is Echo Team Leader. I need an immediate airstrike on grid coordinates Delta 7. Repeat, Delta 7. Her voice, though strained, cut through the static with authority. She heard the confirmation from command, the relief and urgency in their reply, and knew that every second mattered. Her team around her reacted instantly, taking cover and adjusting positions as she coordinated the incoming strike. She gave precise instructions, pointing out vantage points and vulnerable spots, each word measured and intentional. Even wounded, she had become the center of command. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The rumble of incoming aircraft approached, growing louder, shaking the ground beneath her. The enemy fired indiscriminately, unaware that their fate was being sealed from above. She kept her focus, scanning the battlefield, adjusting her team's cover, ensuring that no one would be caught in friendly fire. Her mind was a machine of strategy and calculation, each command saving lives even as her body begged for relief. Then came the moment. The explosions erupted, first faint, then thunderous, shaking the earth and sending clouds of dust into the sky. Enemy positions were obliterated, their advance halted, their morale shattered. Her team cheered, but she barely moved, her body spent, her adrenaline waning. But her eyes held that calm determination that had carried her through the ordeal. The mission was turning in their favor, and it was because she refused to succumb to fear or pain. As the smoke cleared and the echoes of the strikes faded, her squad gathered around her. Relief, respect, and awe were evident in their eyes. She had been wounded, nearly incapacitated, and yet she had commanded the battlefield with unwavering resolve. In that moment, she was not just a soldier. She was a force of will, a testament to the power of courage and clarity under pressure. She allowed herself a brief moment to acknowledge the pain, to feel the burn in her muscles and the sting of her wounds. Then, as always, she refocused. There was still work to do. The mission wasn't over, but they had survived the worst. And for her, that was victory enough. Proof that even in silence and injury, a single voice could command the storm.